Ever feel like you're just drowning in information?
Yeah.
You know, bombarded with news and stories from every direction, like
Yeah.
drinking from a fire hose.
hmm
Well, imagine living in a world where uh, information traveled at the speed of a horse-drawn chariot,
Right.
where myths and legends were just woven into the very fabric of history.
Yeah.
That's the world of
The
Herodotus, a
Herodotus.
father of history.
Yeah.
And today we are taking a deep dive into his life and his work, exploring his surprisingly modern take on things.
And you know what's fascinating is that Herodotus wasn't just passively recording events. He was traveling the known world, interviewing witnesses, collecting stories, piecing together a narrative that tried to make sense of it all.
Yeah, he was a busy guy.
Yeah, he was.
Our source for this deep dive is an episode of the Rest is History podcast. And what stands out to me is that even though he was writing over 2,500 years ago, Herodotus can teach us a lot about how to think critically about information, especially in our world of 2047 news cycles and the internet and all the things.
That's so true. And to understand how he did that, we need to start with his context.
Okay.
Herodotus was born in the 480s BC in Halicarnassus.
Halicarnassus.
Yeah, a bustling port city in modern-day Turkey.
Okay.
This was a crossroads of cultures right on the edge of the Persian Empire, but with strong ties to Greece.
So he wasn't just a Greek writing about Greek victories. He had a much broader, more cosmopolitan perspective.
Exactly. And this was a time of incredible intellectual ferment in Ionia,
Ionia.
the region where Halicarnassus was located.
Okay.
Thinkers like Thales and Anaximander were questioning the nature of reality, searching for universal laws that governed the cosmos.
So Herodotus was steeped in this atmosphere of inquiry and critical thinking.
Absolutely. And you can see that reflected in his approach to history.
Okay.
His masterpiece, The Histories, is not just a dry recounting of facts and dates. It's a vibrant tapestry of stories, travelogues, ethnographic observations, even a dash of folklore. He journeys to Egypt, marvels at the pyramids and mummification, and shares some rather quirky anecdotes about Egyptian customs.
Okay, like what? Give us a taste of Herodotus the storyteller.
Well, he talks about how the Egyptians do things quite differently from the Greeks.
Okay.
For example, they knead dough with their feet but use their hands to scoop up dirt.
Oh, wow.
And when it comes to relieving themselves, the women stand while the men sit.
That must have raised a few eyebrows back in Greece.
You can imagine.
Yeah.
And this leads us to one of Herodotus' most famous insights. Custom is king. He recognized that different cultures have different ways of seeing the world. What seems perfectly normal in one place can be shocking or even repulsive in another.
Yeah, and that's so relevant even today, isn't it? With globalization and the internet, we're constantly encountering different cultures and perspectives. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking our way is the only right way.
Herodotus reminds us to step back and question our assumptions, to consider that there might be other valid ways of looking at things.
Now, speaking of journeys, Herodotus didn't limit himself to Egypt. He ventured as far as India, collecting stories of exotic creatures and bizarre customs.
Like the tale of giant ants in India that supposedly dug up gold. It's a story potentially based on marmots unearthing gold dust, but it shows how he incorporated diverse perspectives and wasn't afraid to include a bit of the fantastical alongside his historical accounts.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, here's what I've learned, but take it with a grain of salt. There's always more to discover. Always another side to the story.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key aspect of Herodotus' work, his skepticism. He wasn't just blindly accepting everything he heard. He was constantly questioning, comparing sources, looking for inconsistencies.
So he was a storyteller, a traveler, but also a proto-historian, trying to develop a method for sifting truth from fiction.
Precisely. And speaking of those human stories, you know what always fascinates me about Herodotus?
What's that?
Is how he uses those small personal anecdotes to illuminate much larger themes.
Oh, I like where you're going with this. Give me an example.
Well, take his account of the rise of democracy in Athens. He doesn't just give us a dry textbook explanation of political reforms.
Right.
He weaves a captivating narrative full of colorful characters, power struggles, and dramatic twists. It's almost like a political thriller, but it's all real.
It sounds like Herodotus really understood how to make history come alive.
He did. It's one of the things that makes him such a compelling writer.
Hmm.
For example, he starts with Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, who's trying to create a more just and stable system.
Okay.
But then comes Pisistratus, this charismatic but ambitious figure who seizes power and establishes a tyranny.
Ah, so it's not a straight line from tyranny to democracy.
Not at all. And that's where Herodotus' nuance shines through. He explains that Pisistratus, while a tyrant, wasn't entirely bad. He actually brought stability and prosperity to Athens. It's almost as if this period of tyranny was a necessary step backward before Athens could take two steps forward.
That's an interesting perspective. I would never thought about it like that.
And Herodotus highlights these complexities so well. He even shares the story about how Pisistratus staged his own return to power after being exiled.
Okay.
He dressed up a tall woman as the goddess Athena and had her ride beside him in a chariot, making it seem like the gods themselves endorsed his rule.
Talk about a dramatic entrance.
Mm-hmm.
But his sons weren't quite as savvy, were they?
No, they weren't. Hippias and Hipparchus, his sons, weren't as adept at maintaining power. Their reign was marked by increasing resentment, which ultimately culminated in the assassination of Hipparchus. This act of violence set off a chain reaction that led to the overthrow of the tyranny.
So out of this chaos emerges Athenian democracy.
Exactly. And Herodotus shows us how this new system, with its emphasis on citizen participation and collective decision-making, transforms Athens. He highlights the challenges and debates inherent in democratic governance. But he also shows how it unleashes the energy and creativity of the Athenian people, ultimately contributing to their victory over the Persians.
It's almost as if democracy itself becomes a character in his story, evolving and adapting over time.
That's a great way to put it. And this raises an interesting question for us today. How do we ensure that our own democratic institutions remain vibrant and resilient, especially in a world that sometimes feels as divided and chaotic as ancient Greece?
Herodotus seems to be suggesting that democracy requires constant vigilance, constant engagement from its citizens.
Right, and that's a message that feels incredibly relevant today. We can't take our freedoms for granted. We have to be active participants in shaping our own destinies.
Now, one thing that struck me in the histories is the recurring theme of freedom versus enslavement. It's a powerful idea that resonates deeply even thousands of years later.
Absolutely. The Greeks were fighting not just for their land, but for their way of life, their right to self-governance, for individual liberties. It taps into a fundamental human desire for autonomy and agency.
But wasn't there a bit of a contradiction there? I mean, the Greeks, while champions of freedom, also had slave-owning societies, right?
That's true. And it's a reminder that historical narratives are rarely simple or straightforward. Even those who fought for liberty could hold contradictory views.
It challenges us to think critically about the past, to acknowledge its complexities, and to see how those complexities continue to shape our present.
Exactly. And it's not about judging historical figures by modern standards, but rather understanding the context in which they lived and the choices they made. Herodotus helps us grapple with those nuances.
It seems like Herodotus was really interested in exploring not just what happened, but why it happened. He wanted to delve into the motivations, the beliefs, the cultural differences that shaped the course of history.
Absolutely. And a great example of that is his account of the Persian Wars. He doesn't just focus on the military clashes. He delves into the cultural differences between the Greeks and the Persians. He contrasts the Persian emphasis on obedience and hierarchy with the Greek focus on individualism and freedom.
So he's suggesting that these cultural differences played a role in the outcome of the war.
Yes. He argues that the Greeks, with their fierce independence and willingness to fight for their individual city-states, were able to resist the Persian invasion precisely because of their different cultural values.
It's a fascinating insight into how culture can shape the course of history. And it reminds me of something you said earlier about Herodotus' emphasis on the importance of understanding different perspectives.
Even though they were vastly different from his own.
That's such a valuable skill, especially in today's world, where we're bombarded with information from so many sources. It's easy to get caught up in our own echo chambers and forget that there are other valid ways of looking at things.
Herodotus reminds us to step back and consider those other perspectives, to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, or at least that there might be more to the story than we initially thought.
And one of the things that makes him such a delightful guide through history is his sense of humor. He doesn't shy away from the absurdity of human behavior.
Oh, absolutely. He sprinkles these little anecdotes throughout the histories that are just laugh out loud funny.
Like what?
Well, there's the story of this Athenian general who was trying to outwit the Spartans.
Okay.
He pretended to be insane, going around barefoot and scattering seeds in the marketplace. The Spartans, thinking he was harmless, let him go.
And I'm guessing he wasn't really crazy?
Not at all. He was playing a clever ruse and it worked. He managed to escape and warn his fellow Athenians of a Spartan attack.
It's amazing how Herodotus can make us laugh, even as he's telling us about these epic events that shaped the course of civilization.
Yeah.
He never loses sight of the human element, the fact that history is made by people who are just as flawed and funny as we are today.
And that's what makes his work so timeless and relatable. He reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles, it's about people, their stories, their triumphs and follies, and those stories have the power to connect us across time and cultures.
It's amazing, isn't it,
Yeah.
how much emphasis Herodotus places on understanding cultural differences?
Right.
It's a thread that runs through all of his work.
Yeah, he really seemed to be fascinated by the diversity of human customs and beliefs. Like, it wasn't just,
It wasn't just fascination.
yeah.
Remember that story about Darius and his experiment with the Greeks and the Colletia? It wasn't just, morbid curiosity. It was a way of exploring the power of custom and how it shapes our perceptions of the world.
Yeah, the Greeks thought burning their dead was the natural way.
While the Colletii believed in eating the remains of their elders, each found the other's practices just utterly abhorrent.
Exactly. And Herodotus uses this anecdote to make us question our own assumptions about what's normal. It's a message that's so relevant today, especially in our increasingly interconnected world.
It's like he's saying, hey, there are many ways being human, and we shouldn't be so quick to judge those who are different from us.
Precisely. He's advocating for cultural humility,
Right.
a recognition that our own way of life isn't inherently superior.
That's a lesson we could all stand to learn, even 2,500 years later.
And that's a testament to Herodotus's enduring relevance. He isn't just a figure from the past. He's a voice that can still guide us today.
So if there's one big takeaway you want our listener to walk away with from this deep dive into Herodotus, what would it be?
I think it's the importance of curiosity, of questioning, of seeking out multiple perspectives. Herodotus wasn't afraid to challenge conventional wisdom, to explore the unknown, to delve into the messiness of human experience.
He may not have had all the answers,
Right.
but he asked the right questions.
Yeah.
And that's what makes him such a compelling figure.
He inspires us to be more than just passive consumers of information. He encourages us to be active seekers of knowledge, to embrace the joy of discovery.
And to never stop questioning, never stop learning.
Exactly. Because through curiosity and inquiry, we keep those stories alive, and in turn keep ourselves alive to the wonders of the world and the complexities of the human story.
Well, that's beautifully put. So to our listeners, I hope this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity about Herodotus and the ancient world.
I encourage you to seek out his work, to explore the stories he tells, and to see how his insights can illuminate your own understanding of the world.
Because as we've seen, Herodotus is more than just a historian. He's a guide, a teacher, a companion on the journey of lifelong learning.
And that journey, my friend, is one that never really ends.